Hi, this is John Corkin, Executive Director of the American Rose Society. So glad you decided to join us on this Saturday afternoon for week 3. To go over the instructions of how today will go, I will hand this over to Kim Merritt of the American Rose Society. Kim?
Thank you, John. Welcome, everyone. I'm Kim Merritt, the Assistant to the Executive Director, Mr. John Corkin. We have a wonderful program scheduled for you today, presented by Ms. Lois Ann Helgeson. Once the presentation is complete, we will go into a 30-minute Q&A session. You will type your question into the questions pod, and I will read it aloud for Lois Ann to answer for you. Now, if you are watching this program with someone else, please post in the questions pod who you are watching with. That way we can note your attendance properly. Before we get started, Mr. Corkin is going to do an introduction of Ms. Helgeson. John?
Yes, I'm so glad to introduce Lois Ann today. She has a background in architecture and landscape architecture. She is a part-time potter specializing in porcelain with crystalline glazes. She is also an avid rosarian, writer, and speaker. Her interest in roses began in childhood, and she has grown roses for over 50 years. She has approximately 650 roses in her garden. She is the North Central District Director, a Master Rosarian, and has received the Silver Honor Medal, Outstanding Judge, and Outstanding Consulting Rosarian Awards. She has chaired the District Horticulture Judges for 12 years and the District Arrangement Judges for 3 years. She has served as the Ramsey County Master Gardener for over 30 years. I'm so glad to have here today, Lois Ann. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, now Kim?
You're good to go.
Step. Okay, I'm good to go. All right, here we go. I've interspersed a number of images into the presentation to make it hopefully a little bit more interesting. I'm actually covering material in the guidelines from chapter 7-6 to 13-5, and hopefully I will have included as well material that any of you potential judges would need to know in order to complete your judging exam. So here we go. Okay, I have material, something on the right side showing this stuff. Is that showing on the screen, or is that?
It is showing correctly. We see species and old garden roses.
Okay, that's the only thing that's showing? Okay,
yes.
Because otherwise I've got this other stuff from the presentation stuff. All right.
No, you're fine.
Okay, I've mixed the order just a little bit, and I put the species and old garden roses first because they are our history in our roses. Species and old garden roses. There are 3 different groupings here. The species roses are wild roses. The old garden roses, those that are in classes that were existed prior to 1867, and the old garden roses from 1867 and later. Just a note that I find very interesting is that all species roses originated in the Northern Hemisphere. If you take a look at the darkened area across the top of the globe, this is where these species roses have originated. There aren't any that are native to the Southern Hemisphere, but rest assured they also grow roses today. The classification types that existed prior to 1867, this is the year of the introduction of the first hybrid T. La France by Goulet. There are 28 different classes. There are varieties that are introduced after 1867 that belong to one of these classes, and they're also considered to be old garden roses. And old garden roses with exhibition form is not eligible to be queen of the show. And I might just point out this is something obviously our new judges would need to remember, but in past years, the hybrid perpetuals were exhibited alongside of hybrid teas when the hybrid teas were just coming into vogue. And I do remember a local show that still kept them in quite a few years after most other shows separated them out. But they are no longer eligible to be exhibited in contention for Queen of the Rose Show. In judging species in old garden roses, we have the same point values to the 6 prime elements of judging. Those you're going to hear again and again. They may be shown 1 bloom per stem, with or without side buds, or with multiple florets, actually with or without side buds. And there is no preference for judging purposes. One is not given any more points or any more consideration. There's no DQ for stem on stem. Penalization according to the degree of distraction, and an entry that doesn't have a stem on stem is generally preferred. And old garden roses, 2 points here that are important for those taking an exam, usually are most beautiful when at fully open stage, and fragrance is not a consideration for judging old garden roses. Quickly going over the prime elements because they are so important. In old garden roses and species roses, the center pip, the eye or button and quartering are normal and they're not penalized. They're also not looked at upon as something that needs to be there. The color, including blotches and stripes, should be typical of the variety. The stamens need to be fresh to get the maximum number of points. Substance, with firmness and color, and stamens are indicators of substance. And be aware that some old garden roses actually have crinkly petals. They're not all like the modern roses. Missing leaves, crooked stems, budding scars, and stem on stem should never be overly penalized. It's only 20 points out of the 100. Old garden roses may also have short stems. However, sometimes if a specimen has better balance and proportion, it would be considered superior. And the size, it's judged on what is typical for a variety. This is just for your information. Species in old garden roses have different bloom forms. You'll notice the button center in the upper left, below it, what we call quartering, where the petals kind of divide into 4s. You'll notice the 5-petal rose, they could be 4 to 8 petals. You'll notice the cupped version on the upper right-hand side. And actually, there are a few old garden roses that have the hybrid T form that we are familiar with. And then there are the multi-petaled ones, the highly petaled roses you see in the 2 on the lower right. I want to go through just a few examples of some of these exhibits from these different classes, just to help you get a feel for what these conditions that we were talking about. Rosa gallica officinalis is one of the oldest roses that we can grow, and it often does have a relatively short stem. There are times when the leaf arrangements are a little bit large by comparison to some of the other roses, but what we look for are the fresh stamens and the fresh petals. Rosa spinosissima altacea is another one where the freshness of the petals and the stamens are extremely important. And these are difficult roses to get to a show in that condition. Another species rose that we'll sometimes see in the summertime or the later season rose shows. And here you'll see both the top and the side view. And the side view has a nice rounded top. And you'll see that the top view has quite a rounded shape and nice fresh stamens. And it is nicely set off by the leaves. Then you will have some that are a little bit different. Here we have Harrison's Yellow from 1824. And this is one of the old garden roses. It's not a species. It's from prior to 1867. But you'll notice that each of the blooms has its own small stem with leaves on it. It's just the way that's what's typical for this variety. Again, we're looking at primarily at how fresh and how symmetrical the exhibit is and how the leaves set it off, fresh stamens. Here is a hybrid China, Eugenie de Beauharnais, 1838. The leaflets are much more modern looking, but they also, if you notice from the top down, it's got one of the multiple heavily petaled blooms, and yet the foliage does seem to set off the bloom quite nicely. Baron Prevost, 1841, you'll see the button center. Here you'll see a bloom that has a relatively shorter stem, and it has some of the leaves high up underneath the bloom. But this is typical of the variety. Probably it's possible that there is a missing set of leaves on the left side, but that is not for certain because I wouldn't know from this picture. If it did, you possibly in your mind would remove a couple points for balance and proportion. Monsignor Bonsine, 1864. This where we're getting into the hybrid perpetuals that are the forerunners to our hybrid teas. You'll notice there are a couple buds on this that is perfectly acceptable in an old garden rose. And what I will point out to you is one of my ways of judging. There's buds in an exhibit. If the buds were encroaching on the bloom and deforming the bloom, then I would say they should have been removed or they should be penalized. In this case, they are not. Silver Queen is another of the hybrid perpetuals, heavily petaled. The foliage is probably, again, more substantial than on some of our more modern roses. This is typical of the variety. And I included this one, Mrs. John Lang, from 1885, for the reason that this is one of those roses that was pivotal in the switch from people exhibiting hybrid perpetuals to exhibiting hybrid teas. Over the turn of the century, there was a period of a few years when it was first that in the national shows, the hybrid perpetuals were accumulating essentially all of the awards. And then it moved to a third to a half hybrid perpetuals versus hybrid teas. And then as the new century, the 1900s, then the hybrid teas literally took over and were winning. But Mrs. John Lang was one of those in the middle of this. And there was probably about a 10-year time period when in the national shows, it was listed in the top winners every single year. So it was considered one of the more outstanding of the hybrid perpetuals in that time period. And we're the northeast quadrant of the United States. So there's quite a number of northern states. This happens to be my yard, but I would personally love to see more of these hybrid perpetuals added to our palette because they do grow quite well. And for me, I have a couple areas, this fence and another fence, where I can count on enough snow cover that most years I get good bloom from them, and that is adequate protection. And I can't leave this section without just adding the American Beauty Rose, which oftentimes is depicted as being red, but it never was. It's a bright pink, and it's really a wonderful hybrid perpetual to grow, if for no other reason, for historical purposes. It had a major influence on flower arranging and on exhibiting, and the florist industry as well. Moving on to the awards. The Genesis Award is the best blue ribbon species rose in a show. The Dowager Queen is given to the best blue ribbon old garden rose introduced prior to 1867, or known to have been in existence prior to 1867. And you'll see that notation sometimes within our classification book. The Victorian Award is the best blue ribbon old garden rose introduced in 1867 or later, introduced into commerce in 1867 or after. If the Genesis Award is not offered, the species roses are eligible for the Dowager or Victorian, depending upon their date of introduction into commerce. And first of all, there are not a whole large number of species roses that were introduced later, but there are a few. And I think that this is one particular piece of information that has been ignored, because I think most people assume that a species rose would be prior to 1867. But if this situation arises, I would suggest strongly that the judges actually double check the date. Modern roses. As the hybrid perpetuals left the stage for winning these higher awards in our rose shows, which they pretty much dominated the rose shows for almost 50 years. So there was not an insignificant contribution to our shows. We get into what we call the modern roses. And I have to also, just because I like a variety of older roses, to show an image of La France, which was considered the first hybrid tea introduced in 1867. And I do have a couple plants of this, and I will tell you someday I will find myself a specimen that is good enough to take to a show at the right time of the year. But I would also, just for those who are taking exams and whatever, please understand that, please remember that La France, even though it's an old hybrid tea, it would have to be exhibited with the hybrid tea in the hybrid tea section. Modern roses. These are the groupings that we're going to look at here next. Starting with the hybrid tea and Grandiflora spray. A spray is a specimen with 2 or more open blooms. One bloom with 1 or more unopened buds is not considered a spray. Hybrid teas and Grandiflora sprays are judged by the same standards as Floribunda sprays. And you're going to hear that comparison throughout several of these sections. The ideal spray of a hybrid tea or Grandiflora would show all blooms at exhibition stage, which would take preference over one showing stages of bloom with fewer open blooms. Consideration must also be taken to the size of the entire spray and the size of the individual florets. And you can look at this in a number of ways. If you had one spray that had 3 perfectly open blooms at exhibition stage, and another one with 3 open blooms plus some buds, it doesn't mean because that the additional one had some stages of bloom or something else, that in that case, it doesn't mean that one is superior or inferior. It's over the overall look of the entire spray, and it's the number of fully open blooms that would make the difference. A few examples. Here we have Stephen's Big Purple. Very obvious, a couple holes in the foliage. They would probably end up showing, deducting a few deductions in stem and foliage, but not a great amount of points. The blooms themselves are in wonderful condition and perfectly in exhibition stage. And yes, there is a slight hole where probably the initial bloom was, but it is not significant. Very nice exhibit. And you have to remember, you just have to beat the competition of the particular day when you bring yours to the show. Here is Maurice Lorillo, and again, 3 blooms, nicely fresh, a little bit more of a spacing problem in the center, but a minor deduction. Very nice exhibit. Dick Clark, this one you can see on the right side, yes, it did receive a blue, and it's kind of a nice rounded shape on the left side for the side profile. Yes, there is a space on the right side, but it is not overly detracting. It might possibly be another time, it'd be another exhibit that had less of that and would win over this one. Modern roses, Floribundas and Polyanthas. The Floribunda class originated as a cross between hybrid teas and Polyamphas. Polyanthas are considered cluster flowered roses as opposed to 1 bloom per stem roses. And that's probably because they seem to show themselves off better as a spray than as 1 bloom per stem. The same point values, again, are used for the 6' elements with the Floribundas and Polyanthas. And spray is defined by 2 or more blooms on a stem. 1 bloom with 1 or more unopened buds is not a spray. Polyanthas are normally exhibited as sprays instead of individual roses, and pretty much because they are much smaller and they just don't show as well as a single rose. Just to hit the points here again, the ideal spray has a symmetrical appearance from the top and the side view, any geometric shape from the top, circular, oblong, rectangular, triangle, as long as a symmetry is maintained, is acceptable. Anything beyond that, you will deduct some points. Domed, rounded, or flat side profile is also considered ideal. And the specimen with the largest number of florets at exhibition stage is given preference over those that do not have it. But here's a good point to remember. There is no preference that's given to those varieties having exhibition form. So if you have 2 specimens, one with exhibition stage and the other with exhibition form, you will be looking at these other factors, the color, the substance, the stem and the foliage. You will not give the exhibition form any priority. Specimens with small faults in stem and foliage, such as torn and missing leaves, crooked stems, stem on stem, or just budding scars, should not be overly penalized. And a pleasing amount of foliage with the proportional stem is what we're looking for. And if you compare 2 specimens of the same variety, the specimen that has more florets at exhibition stage is considered superior. A larger spray than typical of a variety is given more consideration than an average spray of other varieties. And individual florets larger than typical of the variety are rewarded, all other things being equal. Those prime elements are really important. I included just a few images from the guidelines. Here is just one that shows what we're talking about, what we mean by symmetrical and a geometric shape. But again, remember that it doesn't have to be a round shape from the top. And from the side, it can be any number of other symmetrical shapes. Just to point out, here's a Polyanthespray, and you can see why a single bloom would have trouble holding its own against some of the larger Floribunda sprays. We have on our modern roses some wonderful Floribunda sprays, and Dancing Pink is one of the newer ones that are out. Look at the nice symmetrical shape on the right side from the top down, and a reasonably good side profile as well. Foliage that sets it off nicely. Magenta is another Floribunda that has a really outstanding spray shape, and it has a very rounded from the top, you notice you can see foliage around it. And yet, look at on the left side how nicely compact the blooms are. Here is Sparkle and Shine that has some age on a couple blooms, and it's got a bit of an opening on where possibly there was an original bloom. Very nice, but probably not quite as nice as the last two we were looking at. There is for some reason for noting some faults. Most of these sprays that we're looking at, they were formed by several sprays. You see where down where the circle is, where the origin of a number of sprays. But then we can also find this. And what we've often seen, we will generally in a show, you will see one or two of these in a grouping of spray exhibits, whether it's Flora Bundas, or whether it's mini Floras, or whether it's another group. We all, as judges, have seen this. And there are built-in penalties for form that come with this. And I decided I had one, I had one example that looks just about like that. And I suppose if you went into this and did some judicious pruning, you might be able to create a better looking exhibit, but this one might be just not realistic to have a good result. But Sexy Rexy also can be shown if you have a class for single or one bloom per stem, not single, one bloom per stem Flora Bundas. It can show quite nicely. And a couple others. Playboy will also do a pretty good job as being a one bloom per stem exhibit. The stamens on this one are starting to age, but other than that, the foliage is wonderful and it's nice balance and proportion. Henri Matisse, the stem is not perfectly straight, but it is quite nice of an exhibit. Would be Flora Bundas can also be exhibited like this as open blooms, and where the center has opened, and this has very nice clean stamens. One thing you might note, some of you who have grown this, Henri Matisse is one of the striped roses, Flora Bundas, and you notice that this has only a few stripes in it, and I would say that would bring about penalties for color faults, because it is not quite typical of the variety. One bloom per stem Flora Bundas may have a separate class. And one bloom per stem with side growth is no longer DQ, but you would penalize it to the degree of distraction. And open bloom Flora Bundas are judged by the same standards as hybrid tea and Grandiflora open blooms. Those taking the exam might want to take a special note of those first three statements, because there's very likely something there from there is going to show up on the exam. For Flora Bundas and Polyanthrope awards, Flora Bundas, we can have court, king, queen, king, and princess, ARS gold and silver and bronze certificates to match. Or we could have the best Flora Bundas spray if we don't have those certificates awarded. And we can have a Flora Bundas one bloom per stem specimen winner, or we can have a Polyanthespray. And at the option of the show committee, the Flora Bundas blooms may also be eligible for the best large rose certificate. In other words, I believe that this would mean that Flora Bundas fully open blooms could be exhibited along with hybrid tea and Grandiflora open blooms and compete for this certificate. Miniatures. Miniature roses are proportionately scaled down versions of the large roses with regard to canes, prickles, foliage, and blooms. All of the rules that apply to hybrid tea and Grandiflora 1 bloom per stem specimens apply to 1 bloom per stem miniature specimens. And the ideal form follows that of a hybrid tea, but on a reduced size scale. The next statement is something, again, for the exam people. Micro-mini is an unofficial subjective term. It's not a classification recognized by ARS. And if this class is used, the term must be defined in the show schedule for judges and exhibitors. And this is also something that I think would benefit other show schedule writers. If you do something, a class or something that is not officially recognized by the ARS, for which you're planning to use a local certificate or something for the winner, that last statement, if this class is used, the term must be defined in the show schedule for judges and exhibitors. That would apply to you as well. Single miniatures are judged by the same criteria as single hybrid teas. And when we say single miniatures, we're talking about the 4 to 8 petaled roses. Decorative hybrid teas without exhibition form are candidates for all ribbons, including blue, and may reach the miniature court of honor. Something that I think that many judges are loath to follow, but I think that this is in the guidelines, that we need to remember that when we start putting together the Queen, King, and Princess, and 5 or 10 or how many blooms that we would include in the miniature court of honor. We need to understand that decorative hybrid teas are not excluded if they're of very good condition, very good quality. Open blooms miniatures are judged by the same standards as open bloom hybrid teas. Ideal has petals on or mostly on a horizontal plane with fresh stamens. Miniatures, again, are 100 points that we need to remember. The ones I will point out that are in particular that are unique here, the green and white stripes and outer petals are color faults and are penalized according to the degree of distraction. Not necessarily severely penalized, but if they are distracting and they have not been removed in grooming, that there should be some penalty. And miniature with typical variety size that is not rewarded or penalized in addition. But if it's larger or smaller than typical, it is penalized to the degree of distraction that the size deviation creates. Modern roses and the miniatures, let's just a quick look at a couple examples. Here we have Ginny on the left, and a nice set of foliage, probably a little bit lighter green than what you would like. Might be something going on there, but outside of that, it's not missing any foliage. And if you look on the right, it is beautifully framed by the foliage, and it has a nice center. It's actually a quite nice bloom. Ignore the carpeting behind the top view of each of these, but that's what was there when I took the photograph. And you can also ignore the cottonwood tree debris that is under and a couple leaves. But Norma Jean is a nice bloom, though slightly oblong. Probably it is not quite, even though the foliage is healthier, it is not framing the bloom quite as nice as the last specimen. And so you have the judge has to decide which of these possible deductions should be more severe than the others as far as which bloom should win. Modern roses can also be shown as miniatures as sprays. And here we have Swizzle, one of the newer varieties, kind of a triangular shape on the right. And if you notice on the left, one of the things that stands out to me at least, is that there's one bloom that's higher than the others. And that would definitely affect the form of the spray. And so there's something I've just did to kind of show you what the difference would be. Here, I took another picture after removing that bloom, and you will see we still have the triangular shape on the right, though you can see the scar from where a former bloom was removed. But I think that the overall shape on the left side is more acceptable. And I think most of us as judges, in our mind, we'll often look at an exhibit and say, if only they had done, and fill in the blank, but obviously we don't do this at a show, but it is something worth taking a quick look at, so understanding that it, sometimes an exhibit could be improved in that way. Miniature sprays are judged by the same standards as Flora Bundas sprays. All climbing miniatures, with or without non-climbing counterparts, are judged in the miniature class. In other words, even if there's a miniature climber, it does not have a regular standard variety, a standard counterpart, but all miniatures, no matter what, will be put into the miniature class. The miniature awards, miniature queen, king, and princess, ARS gold, silver, and bronze. And there's single miniature, 48 petals, one of the varieties, blue ribbon winner, open bloom miniatures, where you can see the stamens, and the miniature spray, the best blue ribbon winners for each of these. There are ARS awards. Mini floras. Mini floras are a 1999 American classification, and they include cultivars in which bloom and bush size are too large to be classed as miniatures, but really not quite large enough to be classified as large roses. And I think most of us can debate whether or not that description is always accurate, but this is what we live with. Class shows many characteristics of the hybrid tea in both form and a tendency to bloom as a one bloom per stem specimens. All of the rules that apply to hybrid tea and Grandiflora one bloom per stem specimens apply to one bloom per stem mini flora specimens. And something to point out for those taking the exam, mini flora sprays are judged by the same standards as Flora Bundas sprays. Individual florets may have exhibition or decorative form. And here we have something that I consider important also. No judging preference is given to varieties with exhibition form. Judges look for what is typical of the variety with the sprays in particular. Mini floras also have the same 100 points, the same just remember that the faults in stem and foliage should not be overly penalized. The length of the stem should be proportional to bloom size. And they're generally judged pretty much the same as a hybrid tea specimen. All things being equal, a larger bloom of the same variety is rewarded. With two different varieties, a smaller bloom actually may be the best bloom because you don't, what may be typical of one variety for size is not necessarily typical for the other one. And so you need to be aware of, generally try to be aware of what different blooms, what is typical of the different varieties. Bloom size and balance and proportion and knowing what is typical of the variety, definitely those considerations. A couple quick shots of mini floras. And it is very obvious that they are very, very much like a shrunken hybrid tea Grandiflora exhibit. Lovely. Vernon Rickard is a great example. Wonderful center, wonderful color, good for stem and foliage. Little Queen is another one, very similar. And for instance, those minor faults with holes in the foliage would only be any consideration if you were judging for queen and you were right down to two blooms that are almost identical in quality. Mini Flora Awards, King, Queen, Princess, ARS Gold, Silver, and Bronze. These are selected from the Mini Flora 1 bloom per stem, single blooms. There's also a ARS award for Mini Flora Spray. There's one for Mini Flora Single, and there's one for Mini Flora Open Bloom. Large flowered climbers. Large flowered climbers. Those who are taking the exam need to know what this class is composed of. Large flowered climbers, hybrid Witcherianas, hybrid Giganteas, and Ramblers. The Ramblers have been put back into the climber class. The classifications are based on growth habit rather than flower form. All flower forms are found here. Another good point to remember. Specimens with one bloom compete against sprays, which is another interesting quality to this class. Any of these classifications may form a separate class in a climber section. In other words, if a particular show decides that they are going to see an awful lot of Ramblers or an awful lot of large flowered climbers, and they would like to pull out one grouping for these to aid with judging, they certainly are entitled to do that, but you will still only give one award for a climber section. Climbing varieties of other classifications are shown with the non-climbing varieties of their classifications. So in other words, if you have a climbing Floribunda, it is not in does not get put in this class. It goes with the Floribundas. The 6 prime elements of judging also apply to climbers. In the same considerations that apply to Floribunda sprays apply to judging climbers. We're looking at mainly the 2 considerations: overall shape and configuration of a spray and the form of the individual florets. Again, no preference is given to exhibition form. Specimens with the largest number of individual florets in exhibition stage are given preference. Symmetry, top and profile view, uniformity of appearance is important. Just budding is optional. Though if the disbudding should have been done to improve the quality of the specimen, a judge may penalize according to the degree of distraction. We also made a note that in the balance and proportion with judging climber sprays, less stem and foliage is generally available and required to balance a climber spray than a solitary climber bloom. The exhibit must have a pleasing appearance. And again, 2 overall considerations: the spray and the individual florets. Judging 1 bloom per stem climbers. They may be exhibited, climbers, either as 1 bloom per stem specimens or as sprays, and they will compete together. 1 bloom per stem specimen with or without side buds should not be disqualified unless the class explicitly limits it to sprays. Judged by same standards as either 1 bloom per stem specimens, and they're judged by the standards of the variety with no preference, again, given to exhibition form. A spray of the same variety as a 1 bloom per stem specimen would be given higher consideration. In other words, somebody exhibited a spray and somebody else exhibited the same variety as a 1 bloom. The spray would have some preference. But overall, the best climber gets the best blue, the best climber award goes to the best blue ribbon winner. A couple things to point out. This is Above and Beyond, hybridized by David Slezak, and the spring bloom is incredibly outstanding. And you can pretty much guess that in that time period that someone should be able to get a pretty decent looking exhibit. However, it blooms really heavily in the spring and only sporadically the rest of the summer. And this is an actual exhibit from a later show. Yes, it has only 2 open blooms, and it has a nice stem, good foliage, nice and fresh. But you need to understand that while it does not compare to what might be an earlier exhibit that would be possible, it is still typical of the variety for the later time period. And I would not heavily penalize it for not having a lot more blooms. It is obviously not the greatest exhibit that you would ever expect to see with the variety, but it is a nice exhibit. Then, of course, we have others that magically do this at the right time. And here's a good example of the foliage being less on some of these climber sprays than on some other exhibits, and yet that is still quite pleasing. This is Cherry Frost, and obviously a very nice spray. Just a couple others that to give you a little more perspective. Here's a nice dome-shaped Morning Magic on the left side for the profile. And then on the upper view, it's a fairly oval shape. You notice that the petals are a little bit bent and crinkled. This is very typical of this variety. Still a nice exhibit. Then we have Stormy Weather, which is a beautiful oval shape on the upper view and a nice rounded shape on the side view. And this is how we would like to see many of these exhibits, where there is no hole in the center, but it is a quite symmetrical exhibit. Really a pretty rose. Another little example of pruning or disbudding and how you would set up an exhibit. This is Night Owl. You can see all of the stubs left from disbudding, and the top view does not really have a wonderful shape. And I took the same after doing a little work on it, and this certainly improved the top view to a nice symmetrical geometric shape. The one set of leaves that is now missing on the left side, it was in worse shape than what you could see on the other slide, but it still has some reasonable foliage. If I move the image up a little bit, I think it improved the exhibit, but it would be up to the judges to determine whether or not they would agree. Classic shrubs. We have, in our shrubs class, we have classic shrubs and modern shrubs. The classic shrubs are composed of these 4 different classes. Hybrid Mauricii. This is an example of that is Nevada, which is a single petaled, the 4 to 8 petaled white rose. Very nice and quite hardy variety. Hybrid Musk, Buff Beauty is a good example of that. Hybrid Rugosas, Morris Striped Rugosa, and we can all think of lots of other Rugosa roses. And Cordyceae are a lot of the Canadian roses, George Vancouver, John Davis, John Cabot, William Baffin. A lot of these are all Cordyceae, are good examples of that. Here is another of the classic shrubs. Here's a hybrid rugosa. And you would say that there's a lot of space between the different blooms. And my first piece of advice would have been that if it had been possible, it would have been wonderful. This spray probably would be quite outstanding in about 3-4 days when the rest of those blooms opened. But outside of that, it is still nice and fresh. Morris Stripe rugosa does have a lot of these compact sprays. It also is the only known stripe rugosa that I'm aware of. And you see the top view is quite symmetrical. Buff Beauty can put out these sprays as well. The foliage grows a little bit awkward, but it does set off the blooms quite nicely. Again, it's all depends on who has what on a particular day. George Vancouver, nice spray. Beautiful foliage, nice stem, nice substance, great symmetrical appearance both on the top and the side. Party Hardy is a relatively newer classic shrub. Again, this one has very outstanding both symmetry from both the top and the side. And the foliage sets it off very, very nicely. Then we have our modern shrubs. And now the modern shrubs are pretty much we're considered some of the leftovers. And we have, these are being divided now into 3 additional groupings. And they're not, most of our roses in our classification book have not been assigned one of these classes, but I think that most of us can about figure out where most of the roses that we grow, where they would fit into this. Obviously, most of the Austin roses and similar style roses would end up with the English style and style with the abbreviation ENG. The ground cover, most of the time, I think we would look at things, roses like the drift roses, and there's going to be some others that I'm sure most of you could think of as well. And the landscape shrubs, which anything else that doesn't fit into it. And they also pointed out that this includes some of the winter hardy varieties that are suitable for our northern landscapes. This is coming. This is not something that we've dealt with so far in any of our shows, and I don't believe it's in the exam, but we need to know about it. Okay, just a couple examples of some of the modern roses. Here we have All the Rage, a wonderful example that won, I believe, Best of Show in one of the local shows here this spring. Wonderful amount of bloom and very nice spacing on the upper view, even if it's not exactly a geometric shape, but it's very nice exhibit. Nice and fresh, stamens look great. I had to put in at least one of the English style roses, and here we have 3 that are all open and about the same height. Not a lot of foliage, and possibly the rose on the left side, it could be penalized somewhat for not being quite as fresh. They may have even been better off if they would have, here I go again about rearranging an exhibit, the idea that they possibly could have removed that one bloom and actually had a nicer exhibit. But it's, again, it points out that this is that English style class. Another modern rose is sometimes called AC Navy Lady or Navy Lady. It's one of the newer roses out, is in the last few years at least. Very nice side profile, kind of an empty space there in the upper view, but still very nice color and nice foliage. They would end up being as in the landscape shrub class. And here's another one, easy on the eyes, a nice dome shape. This one in particular has a dome shape on the profile and a very rounded shape, geometric shape on the top. Very nice looking. Shows the different stages of development. And again, this would be a landscape shrub. And just one more here, Chinook Sunrise, one of the 49th parallel roses out of Canada, and showing that some of these modern roses can have some pretty outstanding size of arrangements in their sprays. In judging shrubs, include the large group of roses from around 1867 that didn't easily fit into the other classifications. The 6 prime elements of judging are applied. Shrubs may be exhibited as one bloom per stem with or without side buds, or with multiple florets with or without side buds. There's no preference for judging. In other words, don't let any other judge try to persuade you that, oh, one type of exhibit is better than the other just because it exists. An exhibitor may enter either a one bloom per stem specimen or a spray of a variety in each of the shrub classes, unless the schedule has separate classes for one bloom per stem and sprays. Primary consideration is the overall appearance, and stem on stem may be penalized according to the degree of distraction. Quickly over the judging shrub sprays. 2 important considerations are the shape and configuration of the spray and the form of the individual florets. Pretty much the other things apply. And reminder that shorter stems and less foliage are generally needed on sprays than on one bloom per stem specimens. And the 2 important considerations, size of the overall spray and the size of the individual florets. Judging one bloom per stem shrubs. Disbudding is optional. One bloom per stem with or without side buds shouldn't be disqualified unless the class is explicitly limited to sprays. Each specimen is judged by the standards of its variety. No preference given to those varieties with exhibition form. And a spray of the same variety as a one bloom per stem specimen would have preference if they're exhibited together. And we have the Shrub Awards. Best blue ribbon in the classic shrubs and the best blue ribbon in the modern shrubs. And then if neither one of those are given, we could still have just a best shrub. And then the most recent modern shrub, Queen, King, and Princess, the gold, silver, and bronze certificates. Just a quick summary that I added last night because I wanted to emphasize a couple points. And that is, anybody planning on taking the exam, please go over the awards for different classes. And an example would be if somebody gave you a rose name, told you what class it's in and the date that it was introduced, they could ask you possibly what award that it would be eligible for. That's a real big hint. Okay, and know your prime elements. Go over those points, values. And so you have a fairly decent idea, because you will not only use them for the written exam, but later when you do the in-person judging, you will need to know those prime elements so that you can justify your conclusions. Know the 5 quartz, hybrid tea, Grandiflora, Bundas, miniature, mini Flora, and modern shrub. And here's 2 points, or a couple points here. Species, old garden roses, climbers, and shrubs. There's no judging preference for one bloom per stem with or without side buds, or multiple florets with or without side buds. Keep that in mind. And with sprays and one bloom per stem, in general, all sprays are judged similar to Flora Bundas sprays. You want a symmetrical top and profile, and the largest number of blooms in exhibition stage, with no preference given to exhibition form. And in general, also, one bloom per stem, most characteristics are judged similar to hybrid tea and Grandiflora, one bloom per stem. And that's it for this portion of it. And if people have questions, we'll definitely entertain the questions and try to give you an answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Lois Ann. If you have a question for Lois Ann, please post your question in the questions pod. I will read your question out loud, and then Lois Ann will answer it. So it looks like we have a question by Dave Stever. It's so yummy, a new Dave Bang is called a Miniflora climber. I think ARS lists as LCL. Still as Miniflora?
For our shows, we will defer to the ARS classification. And sometimes a discrepancy will be resolved over time, but our final decisions will be made according to what the ARS will call it. So whatever source we have, whether it's going to be the Modern Roses version online or whether it's our classification book or whatever, we will use the ARS classification. And the exhibitor should also use that.
Okay. All right. Second question is the Harrison's Yellow showing actually a lateral, which should be entered in a class for laterals? Each of the stems with a terminal rose appears to be coming from the previous year's growth. Would this be written up as a not conforming with the schedule?
I'm assuming what you're getting at is the stem on stem stuff, which has totally been tossed in the garbage. So there is no such rule anymore, and it doesn't matter. It just simply doesn't matter. It can be exhibited without any problem.
Thank you. So if you have a question, please post it or raise your hand if you feel more comfortable asking your question out loud. Go ahead and click on the hand icon in your control panel. All right, just waiting on a few more questions here, Lois Ann.
Okay, it's fine.
Lee McNeil, I see you have your hand raised, but I don't see your microphone, that your microphone is on, so it won't let you ask your question verbally. But you can post it in the chat if you like. Okay. Any questions? Well, that means you did a great job, Lois.
Well, if anybody decides that they would like to contact me, they're certainly welcome to, and I would try to come up with an answer to anything else.
Okay. Okay, looks like there is a note from Suzanne Horn that Minnie shown was Nancy Jean, not Norma Jean.
Okay, I'd have to go look at that.
Okay. Janetta Denahay, she says, excellent talk, thank you. Lee McNeil says, I don't have a question. I kind of show red, thank you. Let's see here. Mike Eckley says, decorative roses are being defined as spoiled roses in Rocky Mountain versus a rose without form. Okay, so there seem to be a few comments here. Let's see if I can find any questions. Okay. All right. Suzanne Horn also says, according to the guidelines, decorative minis can compete for royalty, but only if they show exhibition form. We should look at that more closely. And Mike Eckley says, how would you define decorative roses?
Pretty much anything that does not have the standard hybrid tea form.
Andy Venable says, when is a spray not a spray? When a few canes come down to a single stem and are actually stem on stem. So he was answering that question. Okay.
Stem on stem has lost its potency for being a penalty or a disqualification, because at this point, what we've been told, or what is the rule now, is that anything, first of all, stem on stem, even above the vase, is not a DQ. If it's very unsightly, we might take points off for it. And then if it's a stem on stem that happens to be below the rim of the vase, then it is of no concern whatsoever to the judges.
Okay. All right, Stephen Stein says, is a single Floribunda, I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, Eligamil for best Floribunda of show? I'm gonna spell it for you, E-L-I-G-A-M-L-E.
I'm not familiar with the variety, but a single Floribunda, you're saying, is it eligible for what?
For best Floribunda of show? Oh yeah, that may be a typo.
I don't believe so, because it would be exhibited in the single Floribunda class, and that is not the class that you would pick the best Floribunda from.
Patsy Cunningham says, can decorative roses without exhibition form, both full size and mini, be in their courts?
The way I read the guidelines today, they should be able to be in the court if they're an outstanding specimen of their variety. I did not see that before in the guidelines, but that's the way the guidelines reads now. And if somebody wishes, I know Bruce Monroe is not on today, but if somebody else has a different opinion, I would certainly be willing to listen to it. But I read this, I took it right from the guidelines.
Okay. Baldo Villegas says, the miniature rose Marietta has been chosen as queen of minis in a couple of shows that he knows of. What is your opinion?
If it's an outstanding specimen, I say great.
Okay. All right. Looks like we have people who has raised their hand and would like to ask their question verbally. So,
Okay.
Mike, please. Mike, you'll have to turn your microphone on or unmute yourself.
This is Anita. Hi, Lois Ann. Great.
Hi, Anita.
Okay, I need to explain decorative. I got into a knockdown drag out with a couple of judges because I said decorative was a rose that would never show, for example, in hybrid teas, the classic hybrid tea of zero, big zero, triangle from the side. And they said, no, it can be any rose that's just crappy. So they put them in as winners of decorative. So can we have a little more distinctive information set on decorative? I mean, I got into a huge battle.
No, I look at when we say decorative, I would say the roses that will never have exhibition form.
That's what I say.
I'm thinking like Peter Maley.
Right, I know that one, yeah.
Well, the ones that they're never going to have that hybrid tea form, but yet they are hybrid tea roses.
Right.
And I would believe that an outstanding specimen of one of those should be able to be on the court. And that's what the guidelines, the way they're written today,
right,
indicate that they should be able to be on the court.
Well, we had a whole section of decorative roses that were subpar roses for different classifications and divisions. And I said, these are not decorative. It has to be something like Melee, or it has to be something like Marietta. I got into this huge battle, and then I thought, okay, I will just ask.
I think that some of these are changes that possibly Bruce Monroe tried to clarify when he rewrote the guidelines recently. And they're anti what I think I was taught when I first took my judging class. Because at that point, I thought that unless it had hybrid T form, that there was no way that you would ever put it on the court. I think this is one of these things that is gradually changing, and I think for the better.
Okay, well, thank you very much for the clarification.
Okay.
Thank you, Anita. All right, so there's a couple more that would like to ask their questions verbally. Suzanne
Okay.
Horn.
Yeah, I'm unmuted. Great. I just wanted to clarify where I was getting my opinion from. In the guidelines under judging decorative, it says, on occasion, a rose having the reputation of being a decorative rose may succeed in being atypical for its variety and demonstrate the high pointed center and all the other characteristics usually ascribed to exhibition form. The fact that a miniature is normally a decorative rose should not present a superior atypical specimen from reaching the miniature court of honor. That's where I was coming from with my thoughts.
That's the way we were taught originally. I'm trying to.
If Bruce has updated that, great. I just need to know about that.
I am trying to figure out where I found it. I believe it's been updated, is what I'm saying, because I printed out the most recent copy, and as I made the PowerPoint, I took things directly off of it.
By the way, this was an absolutely sensational program, Lois Ann.
Thank you.
Wonderful. One of the best I have seen. Absolutely terrific.
Thank you, Suzanne. Okay, so the next person is Lisa Lane. She has a verbal question.
Okay.
Yes, I'm also concerned about the decorative rose being allowed to be on court. Yes, Marietta occasionally gets to Queen of the Minis, and after that happens, the rest of the judges at the show kind of freak out and go, what the heck happened here? And yes, it's a gorgeous rose, and the judges who are judging it get befuddled. I think I would like to ask ARS and whoever's in charge of all this, I guess Bruce Monroe is, to please release a very precisely worded statement about whether decorative roses can be on court, despite the fact that they don't have hybrid T form and don't have the nice, I call it the Dairy Queen hairdo with a nice pointed center. This is going to cause a lot of confusion and arguing amongst the judges at future schools and shows. So I'm asking and tasking ARS to clarify this, and please send out a memo. Thank you. That's all I have to say.
I wish that I had made a notation where it is in the rules.
It's okay. This is Diane. I'm the president of the American Rose Society. I've taken the note down. Don Myers is actually the chair of horticulture judging, and I will follow up with him. It's obviously a great question that we just need to all have the same answer for and the same interpretation. And as Lois Ann has said, you know, things are changing in how we do our judging today and how roses are being evaluated. And clearly even the roses that are coming into, you know, into market. So I certainly have the question. I'll discuss it with Don and we'll make sure that we get everyone an answer.
Thank you, Diane.
Yep.
Thank you, Lisa. Okay, so Anne Marie Harris has a question.
I think I'm unmuted.
Yes, you
ma'am.
are.
Okay. My question goes back to Harrison's yellow.
Okay.
I've seen a number of what are termed laterals botanically when in spray classes. I look at these and I think that's totally inappropriate because those things are not sprays. They have previous year's growth with multiple sprays coming off the side of the laterals. So instead of being one specimen, they are actually a specimen of last year's growth with several different spray specimens growing out of them. How can we clarify that when teaching judges on how to judge some of these spray classes?
First of all, we're not any longer worried about stem on stem, and that's what we worried about last year's growth and where the lateral came from. I think they were looking for specimens that basically came off in some way off a main stem, and these still do. Because that's the only way that you could exhibit those, because you can't exhibit something. First of all, it's illogical to expect somebody to exhibit something on a 3-inch stem. You know, it doesn't have sufficient.
Losan, is it possible just to flip to that picture because it's coming up a number of times at Harrison's yellow? It was right in the beginning. I think you can just move your PowerPoint back, right?
It's
not necessarily.
Oh,
okay, wait a minute. Let me see what I can do.
It's probably, it's around slide 10 or 11.
Okay, so it's back then.
Yeah, it was early on in the presentation.
Slide 10 or 11.
Right there.
Here we go. If you look right where the Y is in yellow, follow that stem up. That looks like the previous year's growth.
That we don't worry about, because that's would be called stem on stem and a problem, and we don't take that into consideration any longer.
But if you look at the bloom that is right above the 4, that lower bloom, that looks like to me a separate specimen from any of these higher ones. Okay, it is coming off the previous year's growth.
If you take then go back, then already I'll show you something else. Okay, I'm going to look for that.
Okay.
No, I'm looking for the sketch from ARS.
Oh yeah.
There. If you see here, you have a main, but you still have a main stem, and you have stems off of that, and then there's sprays off of each one. And how is that different?
But this is 1 year's growth.
We don't hear about that anymore.
But what if you have?
Through Bob Martin's efforts, we've totally eliminated the worry about the stem on stem and what year's growth it is or whatever. It does not matter.
Okay, well, I'll send you by email an article on lateral versus spray and why these sprays shouldn't, laterals shouldn't be entered in spray classes. And it goes to the stem on stem on stem argument.
That was the consideration in the past. We have voted that out. That is not a consideration any longer. Diane, we should also add this to Don Meyer's list of things to look at, but I would strongly say that it is not something we need to change or need to reevaluate in any way.
Yeah, I will do that, and I think this is maybe, it's an impact from the change that we made, and so we should just make sure that we're all considering that in the same way. So absolutely, I've already made a note, so thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Thank you. I was concerned about non-uniform interpretation of these specimens.
Right.
Because they are not being judged the same from different shows in different regions.
Well, this is why we also are doing these updates, is because we need to understand that things have changed, and we need to understand the implications and how this changes our judging.
Good. Well, thank you. I look forward to the evaluation.
There you go.
Okay.
I mean, that's one of the beauties of having this group together, right? Is to ask those questions. So I think it's just wonderful.
Thank you, Anne Marie. Okay, so we have a question from the chat from Jackie Nye. Would a newer moss rose like Treasure Trail that repeats still be considered an OGR?
A newer musk rose?
A newer moss rose?
Moss rose.
Mhm.
Yes, because it's in the class, but it would not, it would probably would be then eligible for the Victorian Award, because it would be hybridized after 1867.
Okay. All right, a question from John Pace, and it is a judge class winner eligible for Best in Show award?
No. The only thing that the judges class is eligible for is the Best Judges certificate.
Okay. Any other questions for Lois Ann? Either in chat or verbally? Okay, so I think those are all the questions. I don't
Okay,
see any.
sounds fine.
All right. So I want to thank you all. Or Diane or John, did you all have anything you would like to say?
Well, this is Diane again. I want to thank Lois Ann very much for the program today. I think it was very informative and well presented. Also, I want to thank again Linda Kimmel, who as our regional director for the Northeast has taken the effort to pull this together, that I know judges across the country are truly benefiting from it and getting those credits that they absolutely need. So I think it's just super. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, everyone, and look forward to seeing you again next weekend.
Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Diane, and thank you again, Lois Ann. Just to let you all know, weeks 1 and 2 videos are available on our website, rose.org, and on our YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and just search American Rose Center or American Rose Society, you will see the videos there. Lois Ann video will be available this week. And then you should receive an email on Monday for Bill Kozumchek's webinar for next Saturday, August the 27th. Okay. So thank you all for attending and have a great weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.